Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. In this video, I will teach you translation and we will look into detail what is translation, its meaning, its nature and scope for translation in literary studies. So without any further delay, let's get into the video. So basically, translation is as old as human civilization. And since the dawn of civilization, we human beings have been using language to translate our thoughts and ideas. We use a set of symbols or codes to communicate or transfer an idea or thought or a feeling to the person whom we address during an act of communication. And here too, we have translation. In this sense, we translate every day. So with the evolution of human society, we became more anxious to know about the thoughts and feelings of people in distant places. Hence we use two sets of symbols and codes to transfer the thoughts and ideas of people speaking a different language to our own language. So this gave rise to translation and as we see and use it today. So the story of translation dates back to the 3rd millennium BC. The Babylon of Hammurabi's day in the 2100 BC, it was a polyglot city and much of the official business of the empire was made possible by writers who translated edicts into various languages. And in India too, our first writers were translators. Free translations and adaptations of epics like Ramayana and Mahabharata have shaped Indian literature in a big way. So moreover, Indian literature until the 19th century consisted mainly of translations, adaptations, interpretations and retellings. So basically translations of literary works and knowledge texts on medicine, astronomy, metallurgy, travel, shipbuilding, architecture, philosophy, religion and poetics from Sanskrit, Pali, Prakrit, Persian and Arabic enhanced our awareness of the world. And as we know, India is a multilingual country where all the regional languages coexist simultaneously on an equal basis, but the dominance of English continues. And over the years, English has become the only means of communication in all political, business, and educational affairs. Hence, it is essential that we understand English and our mother tongue to be able to connect to our own communities in the immediate environment as well as other cultural communities in the outer environment. So here comes the role of translation. Now translation allows different cultures to connect, interact and enrich one another. So in the Indian situation, the role of translation is very significant as it is the home to people speaking 22 recognized languages and hundreds of mother tongues and dialects. So every day in business and even in office communication, we are required to make use of English and one of our mother tongues to communicate with people. So we are bilinguals by default and use translation as a means to communicate. And it is only through translation that people in the periphery and the center, the dominant and the dominated cultures communicate with one another. And hence we can say that India would not have been a nation without translation, as we use translation to communicate and communication keeps us united as a nation. Now let's look at the meaning and definition of translation. So basically the English word translation has been derived from the Latin word translation, which itself comes from trans and latum together, meaning a carrying across or a bringing across. So basically in other words, it is the business of carrying across a message or written content from one text to another or from one person to another and from one language, that is source language, to a different language that can be called as a target language. So it can happen within the same language, that is from one dialect to another dialect or from one form to another or between languages. So it is best seen as a communication process where the transfer of a message or written content from one language into a new language takes place. So basically a translation is a text that is considered to be different from the original, that is the source text, but it is also a fact that the source text and the translated text are the same in terms of the sense they convey. So however, poets engaged in the job of translation often think of translation as interpretation or taking a view or bringing to life or transformation. So whatever may be its meaning, every act of translation involves the expression of sense, and a translation is a text that is considered to be different from the original, that is the source text, but it is also a fact that the source text and the translated text are the same in terms of the sense they convey. And it is often said that translation gives new clothes to a piece of writing by putting it in a different form. And this interactive relationship between source and translation goes on in the hands of mature translators of prose and drama, but it is the best in poetry. So some scholars define translation as an art or craft, and some others call it a science. And it is called an art as all good translations are expressions of the creative urge of the translators. So likewise, it is a science because of the technical formalities and complexities involved in its process. So Roman Jakobson, a leading linguist and noted expert in the subject of translation, defined translation as the interpretation of verbal signs by means of some other language. And through this process of translation, texts in one language are transformed into texts in another language with the same meaning. And these materials range from the isolated words in a language to the complex network of sentences of philosophical texts. Now, the Oxford University defines translation as the process of translating words or text from one language into another, while the Cambridge Dictionary also endorses that. So now this can mean the word-to-word rendering of the text in one language to another, or replacing the equivalence of the words or phrases in one text to another. So basically, the translated text may have formal equivalence when the source text and the translated text look alike in form. So it may have functional equivalence when the source text and the target text or the translated text convey the same sense or perform the same function, though they have formal differences. And it is often seen that the idioms and uses of the source language creep into the target language through translations, which often enrich and shape the target language. So basically, translation is the communication of the meaning of a text in a source language into a comprehensive version of target language without causing any loss to the original message. And it is often thought that if one is a bilingual, that is he or she, can be a good translator, which is not the truth, because people having good communicative and writing experiences in both the languages can be good translators, which includes their being bilinguals. So while translating, a translator discovers the meaning of a text behind the forms in the source language and reproduces the same meaning in the target language with the forms and structures available in the target language. Hence, it is not as easy as it is thought to be. So while trying to be a different version of the original, it maintains its own uniqueness and an identity of its own. Now let's look at the nature of translation. So basically, translation is an interpretative process. The nature of translation depends upon the nature of the document. Translation of a technical or promotional document is easier and requires less skill and expertise than the translation of a text of literature. The vocabulary, grammatical rules, and the sentence structures would match with the nature of the document, the source language, and the target audience. A successful translation satisfies the needs of the target audience either in terms of suitable structures or forms or in terms of the appropriate transfer of meaning from the source text to the target text. And besides having equal expertise in the source language and the target language, a good translator should also have a flair for writing in the target language and be familiar with the socio-cultural context in which a text is set. A successful translator is not a mechanical translator of a text. She or he puts his or her creativity to the fullest extent and goes into the soul of the content. And we can visualize him or her as a co-creator of the target language text as the translated text. He almost recreates the text, reflecting his culture and personality. So while translating, a translator takes into account the lexicon, grammatical structure, and cultural context of the text in the source language to understand the meaning built in the text, and then transfers the same meaning to the text in the target language with the help of lexicon and grammatical structure appropriate to the target language and its cultural context. And this process, every care is taken to ensure that there is no or minimum loss of meaning. Earlier, faithfulness to the original text was considered to be one of the greatest responsibilities of the translators. But now, with the mushrooming of multiple cultures and languages and diversity of political views in a given context, the translator takes liberty with the original text to allow some accommodation or adaptation in order to keep pace with the sense or spirit of the original. So, accommodation is inevitable in practice if the translation is to maintain the essence, impact, and effect of the text in the source language. And this is particularly true of poetry, where the text is highly emotive and artistic in nature. A translator may come across a couple of words which are culturally rooted and thus untranslatable. So, such words are difficult to be translated if the cultural context is missing. But the fact is that individual words may not be translatable, but language is. Now, let's see the scope of translation. So, in the earlier days, translation was considered to be a sub-branch of linguistics, and gradually it developed into an interdisciplinary field of study. And in the last 3 decades of the 20th century, translation studies started functioning as an autonomous branch of study. And today, in this age of globalization, the scope of translation is immense. It stretches from our immediate environment to every sphere of life. The significance and relevance of translation in our daily life is multidimensional and extensive. Translation helps us to know about the developments in the field of creative arts, education, literature, business, science, and politics. It has also shifted from the traditional conception of the fixed, stable, and unchangeable nature of the text and its meaning to a text with the wide scope for variations. And in the postmodern world, translation has become so relevant that people visualize it as a socio-cultural bridge between communities and countries. People now feel the importance of interacting and remaining connected with the people of other socio-cultural communities, both in their respective countries as well as countries across the world. And in this backdrop, translation has acquired an increasing importance and satisfies individual, societal, and national needs. Let's take the Indian society as an example. Whatever we see as Indian, be it literature, culture, history, politics, economics, it is a reality only because translation has made it possible for people to understand, interpret, and compile the literature, culture, history, politics, and economics of the respective states. And in other words, we can say that it has become a unifying factor for the country. So friends, I hope you enjoyed this video on translation and learned a lot. So you can continue studying with me by subscribing to my channel. Thank you for watching.